Hi, Sheri.
Hey, lovely to see you.
Likewise, yeah. So I hope everything is going well for you on your side. So thanks for joining me today in this conversation, following your residency with us. We're truly honored to have you be part of our programming. And I want everybody to know that this conversation will be conducted in English as it's your preferred language.
I'm
But
very grateful.
but we'll have subtitles available as well below we have subtitles available below the screen. So I'm talking to you from Limagier, which is located on the unceded and conquered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And you are joining me from London?
Yeah, so I'm calling in from London, Ontario, which I have only been living in for about 6 months, so I still haven't learned every nation whose land I'm on properly, but it's Anishinaabe land, and yeah, I'm really happy to be a guest here.
Yeah, and so as an institution, but also as I would say as individuals, here with the team, we want to contribute to the process of understanding, of course, and healing and reconciliation through open-mindedness and reciprocal relationships. And I'd like to begin with expressing my gratitude to the people and the relationships that we are building on this land, whether it is with you today, but also with communities that interact with us near and far. And I think for me, it's important to say that because I'm not from here. So I'm new to Canada. And I also want to add that this openness and this commitment is also not limited to Indigenous communities, and we want to extend, it to those representing visible minorities, such as people of colors, African descendants, neurodiverse people, LGBTQ plus communities, and really whoever doesn't fit in the expected criteria or mold of society. So yeah, I just want to say to everybody, please just know that you are welcome. And so yeah, today let us hold this space and with care and curiosity for each other. And that has been, and I think will continue to be my motto in 2023.
It's an important one.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just dive in. So I will start by asking you to introduce yourself. In this week's residency, you've presented us a multidisciplinary practice as a way of being, as a way of life, and you've talked to us about notions of identity rooted in intersectionality, social justice, and ecology. And so I'd like for you to introduce yourself in your own words and tell us more about those values and how they manifest themselves in your body of work.
Absolutely. So Tansi, Sheri, Osden, Nault, Dishinakashun, Michef, Pi Neheo, Pi Moneo, Nia. And I just, said, hello, I hope you're well. And that my name is Sheri Osden Nault, and that I am Michef and Neheo, which is Cree, as well as of white settler and refugee, actually, ancestry. I don't speak a lot of the language, but I learn what I can, and you and everyone checking out the Instagram will see that some of the works are titled in Michef, and for me that's part of kind of how I can learn the language and keep it present in my life, even though I maybe find learning language to be very challenging. By the way, you're at least bilingual, and I have so much respect for that. That's just on my mind as I was saying that. So I'm a visual artist and a community worker and an educator. I mentioned earlier that I moved to London just about half a year ago. So I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Western Ontario, which is how I find myself here and somewhere I'm grateful to be. I've been a practicing visual artist, oh my goodness, for like not quite a decade now, but getting near it, which is wild to think about. And I also run a community-based project called Gifts for Two-Spirit Youth, which is, sort of a passion of mine, again, that like people will get to learn more about on the Instagram, so I won't get too far into it. And I'm part of the Indigenous tattoo revival movement. So I practice hand poke and skin stitch tattooing and have had some mentoring in that, and also am actively participating in conversations about bringing that tattooing forward and what it looks like and what it means. And
So I have to say that we actually know each other, and well, it's the first time that we speak to each other. But you know, I first encountered your work through the group exhibition Lisa on which we both worked in 2018. You was part of the exhibition as an artist, and in my case as the curator of interpretation back in the days when I was at the Art Gallery of Alberta in Edmonton. Lisa, which stands for the sun in Michif, was curated by Amy Malboff and J.C. Ray Schultz, and it has been, I think I can say that it has been, a transformative project for many of us. And so both Amy and Jessie, we're looking at the shifting boundaries of contemporary Métis practices in this exhibition. And, they did a road trip all over Canada, and so selected 13 artists to showcase, contemporary Métis practices. And so there is a podcast actually about this exhibition called In Conversation with Amy Malboff and Jessie Ray Short, #MétisAF, which is still available on SoundCloud. It's still accessible. And so, I thought it was interesting to point that out, because these are resources as well that still exist, that are available, and that kind of support what we're going to be talking today as well. I guess what I wanted to say is that I've been following you and your work for a while now. Without you knowing it. And so I'm really pleased to be able to chat with you today. And so you in this residency, you talk about the combination of traditional and contemporary Indigenous art forms, one of them being Indigenous tattooing. And I understand the connection to the body, the human body, and its mapping or its exploration, but I'd like for you to maybe elaborate on what attracted you to this art form specifically.
Yeah, I wound up sort of tattooing a bit just in my personal circles before I was maybe as aware of what was going on in Indigenous tattoo revival as I was of just, my sort of interest in like body modification and things like that. As, someone who had that kind of visual arts background, it was something I felt pretty capable of doing. And even from early on, it was a way for me to offer myself and my friends who, artists, queer people, from all sorts of different backgrounds, usually didn't have a lot of money, but maybe wanted that sense of ownership over our bodies and kind of how we're perceived that tattoos can help create. And so I started doing, tattooing just for like myself and my friends because I could do it safely and affordably, and it kind of gave us access to that. And then Dion Casas, who is the person who mentored me and in many ways continues to mentor me and so many people, but guided me through learning skin stitch. He was running the Earthline tattoo school at around the time that I'd maybe been tattooing for a few years, and seeing what people were going and learning there and doing, and the conversation that was generating really drew me more toward the like indigenous revival of tattooing practices. And actually sort of like small interconnected community and world, Amy Malbeuf was, I think, one of the first sort of generations of students that learned at the Earthline Tattoo School residencies.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, we talked about a little bit about it before, but I really connected to this aspect of your work and your creative process, because I am myself a tattooed person, and that reminded me the experience I had, and maybe I can share that with you. So when I first wanted to get tattooed, I reached out to a group called, it's actually a duo of artists called the Expanded Eye, and they're based in London. And what attracted me to their practice is that they are firstly visual artists, so they work with found objects, but they also do tattoo projects. And so I contacted them, and I really truly enjoyed the process because, first of all, the deal was that you will not see your design until you come and get it. So you will send us a story. If the story, excites us, then we'll start working on a design. And then at the time I was living in the Middle East, so I was living in Doha. And so they were in a residency at the time in Switzerland. So that meant literally booking a flight ticket. I mean, it was like a real commitment because it was taking a plane, going there, not knowing what your design will be, and discovering that on the day of your tattoo. And I found this was like, it was scary, but at the same time, it was so meant to be. So yeah, and they obviously they took in consideration, things that you really don't want, so maybe some colors that you don't want to have, or but other than that, they had like carte blanche on what to do. And yeah, and so we arrived there, and I discovered it was first drawn on a paper, so it was first a work on paper. And then after that, after 7 hours, it was on my skin. And so that was a completely transformative experience. I will remember, I think everybody who does a tattoo remembers it, but but that was pretty particular, pretty special. Yeah, and so the tattoo that I have here is actually inspired by Clarissa Pinkola Este, woman who runs with wolves. And I think when I did it, it was about identity, and it was about, I just had my son, and I think I was kind of trying to figure out, how can I be all this multifaceted person, being a mom, being a professional, anyway, and how do you keep your creative power, your creative fire? So it's like a two step kind of tattoo. You have the I have to look at myself so I can see if
Oh yeah.
there you go. So yeah, so you have the first part, which really, so that's the fire. The fire starts there because we've been traveling so much and living in many places. My house is with me, so I always carry my house with me. And my name means sky full of stars, so there is like stars involved in that in the drawing. And so following the story of woman who runs with wolves, the woman becomes a wolf. And so to find your creative fire, you have to activate it. So the other side is is the hand of the artist. And so it's only when you connect them that, it's just a reminder not to forget yourself. Anyway.
That's such a cool story. It's nice to hear about other folks who are like working in the sort of visual arts realm that I'm working in, also tattooing, I maybe don't run into that a lot.
Check them out. Like they're called the Expanded Eye, and this is one story, but every single tattoo that they make is actually is a unique experience as well. And so as we're talking about creative process, I mean, when you're tattooing, you're dealing with the living, with flesh, and all its perfections or imperfections, I guess. So I wonder, if the story of the person that you're tattooing influences your creative outcome. Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah. It's huge, especially because I've never been someone who tattoos sort of for the general public. There's always some level of like pretty special connection, whether it's because, in the early days, it was someone that I knew, or for myself, or folks who then by word of mouth will be told that they could get tattoos from me. And I now promote it as available to Indigenous community members and go to tattoo gatherings that are a really fantastic way that people kind of find us tattooers who are doing culturally specific tattoos. Anyways, it's always really special because there's always these sort of like personal or community specific connections. And because I really do try to center the empowering experience of getting tattooed, I think that, as somebody who has been trying to figure out how I sort of fit in different worlds as somebody who's like queer and identifies as trans, as well as being mixed race, I have always sort of found tattoos to be a way that I more directly embody myself. And so I try to be really conscientious about how that process kind of facilitates that for other people. And especially when I'm working these days, usually with other Indigenous folks, I make a really strong point as well to be very like conscientious about consent and boundaries and sort of letting people know like, okay, I'm going to do this now, and trying to make sure that it's an experience of feeling empowered and in control of our bodies. And that's, something I've had really great responses from people about, and it's really important to me as people who've survived colonization. We often ongoing colonization too. We often struggle to be the people who get to be in control of our fates and our bodies. And so even in this small experience that I'm in control of, trying to make sure that that's centered is really important to me. Yeah. And then on the like technical side, everybody's skin is different and takes ink different. And it's like fascinating and beautiful and sometimes challenging and sometimes surprisingly easy. And I really sort of love that technical intimacy too.
Yeah, you're kind of both going into the unknown at the same time as well. There is a lot of care in your work and your approach. Care for yourself, care for the living, and you also mentioned in your residency your love for found objects or earth materials and how you incorporate them and transform them into sculptures. So to me, these are related, and it's almost as if you were giving them, a second life or accentuating the life in them. So can you tell me more about, your attraction to wood specifically and as a material or wooden object?
Yeah, I think like what you said actually touches on a lot of it surprisingly directly for me. Both the sort of trace of the life that like that being as a plant, as a tree, as a fragment of a being, you know, if it's just a branch, the life that it's had and the sort of traces of that tend to really like interest and inspire me. And I mean, I make a lot of jokes about being like the person who's always bringing a cool stick home. You know, I never know where I'll be, and I'm like, oh, this piece of wood is just like calling to me.
Yeah.
And I try to be responsive to that when I can, while also like making sure I don't bring every cool stick home, maybe sometimes. But I think of it like, I do think of the sort of sculptures and the things that I create as becoming beings too. And I think that there's a lot of sort of different ways that we can think about that. And some of them for me are grounded in maybe indigenous like worldviews that I've been raised with. For example, if not me, I don't know how to hunt, but if somebody is hunting a deer, you know, the deer is a being that they're respectful of. They'll usually make a tobacco offering after they've successfully killed it, and they see that deer as like giving its life for them. If the hide is turned into rawhide that is then made into a drum, the drum is also seen to be a living being. So even though there's sort of fluidity between these different states of being, sort of each version of wholeness is also kind of seen as like a living entity with spirit. And I, at least personally, have that sort of relationship with my sculptures. They're sort of beings that I like looked at one that's over in the side of the room as I was saying it. They're like beings that sort of live in my space as I'm working on them and as we grow together.
Yeah, they have an aura, right? They keep on living, I guess.
Yeah.
Whether you work with the living, you know, when you're tattooing someone or on the sculpture, you know, I was reading, you know, attaching hair to the roots with beeswax. So clearly the question of time and labor is involved in those actions for sure. And it seems to be at the essence of your practice as well. I mean, I'm curious to know, why is temporality so important to you? And is it about timelessness or something else? That sounds like a really obscure question, but
I like how you frame it, because temporality is such a huge component of how I do things, but I don't usually think of it in terms of temporality. I think of it as like this sort of, and again, I mean, I can only say the word care so often, but you know, like with each like poke, tattooing, or with each kind of small repetitive thing I'm doing when I'm making something, it's like caring action that I am creating in this sort of ongoing and repetitive gesture. And so, yeah, I really like that framing of temporality, because it always, like everything I do takes tons of time, and I don't usually think about that component. I think more about the gesture. I think probably because that's like sort of where my mind is. But I think that it's like spending time together is maybe the real part of that for me. Shared time.
Yeah, and so as we're touching on the role of time and labor in your work, maybe you can also tell us about, you know, your interest in archives for remembrance, I would say, and talk a bit further about the work Mina Kawapamiti.
Yeah.
Mina Kawapamiti. And so its connection to the healing process of indigenous communities. This is another, layer of temporality, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So you actually did a surprisingly good job of saying that. Nina Kawapamitan is how I would say it, and I'm not the best at the accent, but so I was impressed anyways.
I love languages.
I love them, but yeah, it's hard if I don't hear them all the time. So I know.
Yeah, but I can't remember any of it. I've stopped learning languages because I can't remember it. But if I could, I would speak 5 or 6 languages, but I gave up on that. Anyway.
Yeah. So that work, yeah, is a really sort of special and challenging and ongoing work. And the way that it sort of came about is that I was invited to present a performance art piece in, I think the invitation came early in the summer of 2020, and the piece was going to be presented at the end of July. And what was so significant about the summer of 2020 is that that's when there were all of the Black Lives Matter protests and people protesting about George Floyd. And during that time period, there were also Indigenous folks who were killed during what should have been wellness checks, such as Rodney Levi. There was a young Afro-Indigenous woman in Toronto, and another Indigenous woman, sort of all in that same time period. And so police violence was really at the forefront of my mind and everybody's, and it, I think, still is, as we're kind of seeing with how upset people are about the extraordinary police budgets it seems like every city has requested for the coming year. And with that in mind, I was sort of struck by the idea of trying to make art that didn't respond to everything that was going on. It seemed like it would be sort of like, I don't know, frivolous. And at the same time, I wanted it to be very grounded in myself and my own experiences. I did research in preparation for that show that starts from a date in my own life when my father, who has now been sober for like over 25 years, I think, which is just epic. But when his sort of mental health hit a crisis point, and I thought my mother had called the cops on him that night, and I sort of didn't know how it had ever worked out okay, because I knew there were weapons in the house and stuff at the time. And I know that sounds that's a very heavy opening, but it's also a very heavy artwork. And so I wanted to kind of approach things from a personal perspective, because I don't want to be making art about like other people's hardship that I can't kind of speak to personally. And I had always felt very, lucky that we came out of that incident with my father alive, and he got sober after that. So like alive and honestly on the mend. It turned out my mother hadn't called the cops that night. I had misunderstood, and she waited until the next day, which is probably why things turned out okay. But so I sort of chose that point in my family history to give a framework from then to the present to start researching police involved Indigenous death. And what I found with that research is that there's sort of no records. It's scandalous. When somebody dies in an incident that involves the police, they don't record that person's ethnicity. There is an archive the CBC is building that is, fantastic, because it records anything sort of publicly, but it only records like these very obvious incidents. It doesn't involve deaths in custody. It doesn't involve things that, Indigenous people know have happened that have never been sort of publicly admitted. Yeah, I sort of started doing this research, and it's a spreadsheet on my Google Drive, and I'm like, if anyone has like something you want to do with this info, I will share it. Like I hope to one day use the information for some kind of social leverage. But then also alongside that research, I wanted to embody an act of care. I was lucky enough, I know someone in my life who worked on the Walking with Our Sisters project, and I was given some advice about kind of creating artwork that addresses, the spirit of those who maybe died violently in a respectful and caring way, a way that cares for myself and for those spirits. I've been creating
just a small piece of beadwork for every person whose name that I find. And I store those with medicines and care for them actively. And in the performance of the artwork, I was wearing on my body, and they're these red pieces, so they kind of, look like a gesture of a blood drop, pierced to my skin at all the pieces I had beaded up to that point. And it was really important to me to embody healing, so I don't like get pierced and kind of get wounded in front of people. The performance art starts with these on me, and then I name each person who I've found in my research and remove a needle that's pierced through my skin holding the beadwork, and then place the beadwork with medicines. And after I've, removed all of them, I sort of explain the small context of the family history. That's how I relate to that and what kind of framework I've chosen. And that means that the gesture of sort of removing the wounds is forefronted, and the information's kind of first available based on what people recognize. So names that people might know from the media. And then I wash the blood away and kind of re-robe, and that's the end of the performance. And I have, friends who were connected to me sort of planning that, who are in the Indigenous community, who said that, it felt like very cathartic and caring and healing for them. But at the same time, I also don't know that I could ever claim that it might be that for everyone, but that's sort of the hope. And then also this sort of gesture of care for spirit. And so it's got the two kind of facets for me, I guess, about trying to ensure it's a healing thing, is both having the research, which is sort of an active, useful, potentially useful component, and then also having this sort of artwork, which is based in ceremony and caring, and also incorporates sort of a timeline. All of the beaded pieces I've sort of committed to not hold on to for more than 7 years. So I will have a fire and offer them as a sacrifice at the end of that time. What I'm doing, be kind of invoking spirits into presence or something like that, that then is an act of care and release to ensure that I'm not kind of overstepping or, yeah.
Wow.
I know that was a really big explanation. It was a big question.
No, it's amazing. It's really powerful. It's really powerful, and it's really meaningful. I think it's very interesting to listen to what you're saying. I don't know how to move forward after that. This is not so much a question. It's more a reflection that I had, and when I was looking at your body of work, and so I just want you to maybe bounce back on what I'm saying. So I noticed that I find it a contrast, or I described it as I was preparing the question, I described it as maybe an ambiguity between the perenity of a tattoo design, and I would say the ephemerality as well, or the vulnerability of the natural material that are placed in context of a gallery space. We talk about the roots of the log starting to dust, the ground, for instance, as if the work, itself had several states of life, and we've just talked about it. It continues to live in different states. For me, it was almost as if it was, running out of time, or if time is running out. Now, I also realized that in both cases, the work, and maybe this is where I'm wrong, and you've kind of explained it earlier, but the work will cease to exist to the eye at some point. And so the only trace that is left will be the photo documentation or the video performances that you do. I'm getting there. And so the tattoo, in its way, it's going to live its own life. on the body of the owner, because the owner is gonna go somewhere else and keep doing their own thing, and the sculpture will slowly decay, with time. So as an artist, you have to let go of it, and I found that quite interesting. And it's almost like what's most important really is the moment and the place in which you create or you perform the work. And for me as a viewer, my experience can only be one, it can only be a glimpse of a recorded moment in a way. So that's how I felt. So what's your take on that?
I think it's interesting in so many ways. For some reason, even when I think of like photo and video documentation, one of the first things that comes to mind to me is how impermanent it is. I mean, I think at this point in time, a lot of institutions are running up against that too. If they have an artwork that's on a CD, like how do you actually make that permanent? Because it will degrade with time. And the sort of strange complexities of that. It's definitely something I think is contradictory in my art practice to maybe certain standards or goals of other artists and historical art practice that are focused around how can we make this the most permanent version of something. How do we, I know a painter who's like, how do you make a painting that's going to last forever? And I'm like, I have never dreamt of making something that would last forever.
Well, because artist wants to leave a trace. I mean, I guess, so you're like pressing out something, and so then it's out, it's there. And and then it's just disappearing.
Yeah, I think the biggest sort of lasting impact, maybe in the case of both the tattoos and the art, is the experiences people have with it. Perhaps the sort of ongoing potential ripples of those experiences are what I'm most focused on. But at the same time, it's always sort of hard to like have an art piece go to a collection, which is weird because I don't feel this way about tattoos. But like a sculpture goes to a collection and then it hardly gets seen and experienced. And that's what I have the most like emotional challenges around, is when it's maybe still alive, but it's just in storage.
Yeah, because if you think about it, it only exists because someone is looking at it, right? So something happens. If there's no connection, if there's no interaction, well, then it's kind of lonely. What are your inspirations? Do you who are your mentors and people that you look up to?
I'm like a huge fan of Rebecca Belmore's, and like who isn't, but so I've been really inspired by what she does and has done for so long, and especially when I'm looking at making performance art, I think both of times I've seen her talk and work of hers that's really moved me. Actually, her brother, Michael Belmore, is an amazing sculptor too. He makes these pieces that are like, or the pieces I know the best are like these stones, and he's carved these two surfaces to face each other, and he puts copper between them, and like light just glows out of these copper surfaces that face each other. And I think that that working with stones in what is definitely a slow process to create this sort of experience thing is maybe what I relate to there. Since the days of doing my undergrad at the Alberta College of Art and Design, loved artists like Kiki Smith and Sheri Boyle, these women who are sort of interacting with what might be considered, fairy tale and other in these uncanny and interesting ways. Yeah, now I feel like I've almost reached a point where I'm familiar with so many art practices that I could give you a list of hundreds of names of people who inspire me, but those are the folks who come to mind right away.
Well, thanks for sharing. And no offense to all the people we didn't mention, but
yes.
No, it's always a tricky question. And I'm always curious as well to retrace that that moment when you knew you would be choosing this life as well. If it was ever a choice as well, I would say. And so now that you've committed yourself to being an artist and to this path, what would you tell your old self, as an aspiring artist?
Yeah, I don't know if I know a way to like phrase it into a simple sentence, but a lesson I learned pretty early on. I was working at the Banff Center alongside their artist residency programs, and I sort of learned through being around these artists who were more experienced than me, who were making amazing work at these residencies, that like nobody really knows what they're doing, and it's like it's okay. Because I think that when I was sort of trying to make art before that, with every project I approached, I would think I had to have it all figured out and that it had to be the most perfect version of that project that I would ever make, and I could only do it once. And it's okay to be like feeling it out and learning as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's I guess okay to feel that the work is also living its own life and finding its own meanings with depending on who is looking at it as well. So yeah, letting go.
And sometimes you're going to make bad art, and it's okay. You don't have to show it to people.
Yeah. So okay, so time has passed way too fast.
Yes.
I have one last question for you, and it's about what is upcoming for you, and when can we go see your work, now or in the future?
There's a couple of things relating to my film, Mashi Kashkatau, that are upcoming but not announced yet. So just keep an eye out for those. As far as tattooing stuff goes, I'm going to be at the Tyendinaga Tattoo Gathering, which is on May long weekend, and then hopefully doing some other traveling and offering tattoos to other Indigenous folks over the summer. And I opened some stuff on my laptop earlier so I wouldn't forget.
Yes, no worries.
But I'm going to be in a group show at the Robert McClellan Gallery in Oshawa in the fall with some other like amazing young Indigenous artists who are doing really cool stuff. Myself and two colleagues who became tenure track faculty at the same time as me at Western are having a group show in the summer at the university. So that's going to be really cool, sort of the, hey, we're the new guys here show. Yeah, and those are the things that come to mind right now, and probably other stuff I'm forgetting, but
wow, that's so cool. Super busy.
Yeah, definitely. Luckily, I love being busy considering that I make such like slow process oriented things.
That's true. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sheri, for taking the time really to share, all the stories and all your thoughts with me. I really, really, truly enjoyed this moment. And I really hope that, our conversation can contribute to, changes in perceptions around us. So until next time, please continue to stay safe, stay curious, and stay in touch.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been such a wonderful chat.